post college and during college, I sort of moonlit as a stand-up, basically. All right, and I really thought I was going to make it. Honestly, I did. And this guy kind of pulls me aside one day after a particularly bad set. He puts his hand on my shoulder over a drink, and he says, "Trey, you should really stick to the research stuff." And I was like, "Why?" He's like, "Trey, because best case scenario in stand-up, best case scenario, you'll be doing a set in a basement of a Hyatt looking out over Gary, Indiana." And I guess I'm not so far from living my dream doing that here today. But honestly, it was like, it's hard because Chicago is actually a good place. But we did have a great view of Gary, Indiana. So I got to work through that. All right, but a core tenet of teaching something that is complex is the audience needs to know what's in it for me. Oh, that worked. Beautiful. And so what we're going to be talking about fundamentally, I know we have a lot of actual radiologists here, but we're going to be talking about the businesses that you're a part of. We're going to be talking about patient flow, how to make more of it. And we're not really going to be talking so much about the in-visit patient experience. We're not going to be talking about Andrew Ng's lab and all the sexy imaging stuff that a lot of companies here are doing. We're going to be talking about network dynamics, so graph theory of getting patients sent to you quickly, cost effectively, and being the absolute best at that. And to do that, we actually are going to use graph theory because we're in a very techie part of the part of the conference here, and you're going to see why it's actually a really, really helpful tool to think about patient flow in the U.S. healthcare system. From there, we are going to go into what you hopefully signed up for. She's about ready to take a step back. No, take a step back forward. You can stay. It's only 30 more minutes. We're going to be here for a long time. And that's where we're going to talk about why we don't say quote unquote AI, why it leads to so much kind of BS hand wavy, and what you would do if you were actually going to build your own model, how you were going to build that model, and why you're going to build that model. And being in this pavilion, it's like, oh, this is kind of as poignant as ever. And so hopefully it will be useful to you. And then we'll talk a little bit about incentives. And this might not be your guys' everyday world, but we're going to talk about the fax machine in healthcare. And I hope you find it interesting because people are always like, really? The fax machine? How is that still around? And we're going to talk about exactly why the fax machine will be around for at least 10 more years, is my guess. But quickly, who am I? I'm the co-founder and CEO of this company in New York called Tenor. I'm likely the worst engineer on my team, which makes me the best person to be talking to you, is sort of how this goes. But all jokes aside, I was like a TA. I wasn't actually that good. And so I taught it. And what I got to do was basically divert a bunch of kids that would have otherwise shilled Temu ads to your 14-year-old kids on TikTok, and instead kind of convince them to come work in a startup. Oh, that is a bold man sitting up in the front. All right, we love that. Thank you. And the good ones are back home, so the early kind of founding ones. And what are we talking about? Like, who are we as a business? This calendar year, we processed 8 million patients. Yesterday, Becker's put us in the top 50 most promising digital health companies. Found out through my mom. It's kind of a sick feeling, to be honest. And then, CB Insights, puts us next to a bridge in terms of automating the operational tasks around healthcare providers. The last time I was seated next to a bridge, their CEO, trust me, they will never let me sit next to him again. I pissed him off so much. But anyway, sorry. And of course, we've spent too much money doing it. The thing that we are actually, though, pretty excited about is what we talk about is basically patient throughput on a per provider by provider basis. At the end of the day, especially if you're a radiologist, what you want to see is full beds. You want to see patients coming in every single day. You want to see machines getting maximal utilization, and you want to be at good work. And you really don't want to have to have massive amounts of admin overhead to get those patients in. So one of these stats that we track that we're super, super proud of is how many people does it take to get a patient processed. And that number this year, trust me, the graph looked the exact same last year, up to 300, and we were super excited about it. And now it's over 1,500, meaning we have individual providers and centers running over 1,500 practice patients per admin staff. So let's get on to the meat of the discussion. And what we're talking about today is hopefully a little bit different. We're talking about basically everything outside of where you work, everything outside of an imaging center. And we're talking about it the lens of the patient processing problem. And if we're being more specific, we're actually talking about the pre-visit patient processing problem. And we're going to use graph theory to actually map why does it take so damn long to go from your primary care provider here with chronic back pain all the way here to an outpatient imaging center where I'm actually being diagnosed and being seen. And ultimately, while everybody has a different number, how do you get that number down? And how do you make sure that more patients show up so that things do not get missed? Like I said, it's all sort of a tough subject to be sort of joking about, so I have to oscillate in between. But let's talk about money, right? That was exciting. Well, what you're going to basically see is that, frankly, at the end of the day, while we are talking about this very, very important thing, we are talking about getting patients processed from point A to point B that much faster, I am going to argue that so many of the symptoms of the problems that you hear about at your center come from this inability to effectively get patients through from point A to point B. Okay, hope that makes sense. And to explain this and kind of prove this theory, to be kind of the annoying math guy, we're gonna employ a bunch of weird notation and graph theory. And I promise this will actually be like, you'll get to go home from the conference, and if you remember anything through a potentially hungover Wednesday, you'll remember what you learned at, okay, all right. I know you, all right. Looks German, he's definitely drinking. We're gonna remember a little bit about graph theory, a 101 on graph theory. So the key ideas about graph theory, first and foremost, we have to understand that we have nodes. And nodes in our case are really providers and payers. We also have edges, and edges describe the relationship between one provider to another provider. The helpful little analogy, if we go back to our little graph here, is that the edge is that tightrope that the patient is effectively walking when they go from their general practitioner into the outpatient imaging center. Now, Trey, how did you learn about this problem? Oh, thanks for asking, guys. Appreciate it. My mother's actually on this PCP side. She's in family medicine, and she's a very colorful lady with her language, and she used a lot of expletives talking about this black hole imaging center. She would be here, and whenever she would have to send a patient to this one imaging center in particular, she said it was like sending them into a black hole. And so I saddled up, probably 6 years ago. I put on like a little badge pretending to be with Family Pacific, and I walked on over to Black Hole Imaging Center. And I was like, all right, guys, what's going on? Kick down the door. Why are you so bad at processing these patients? And they showed me their fax queue, and they showed me the Epic orders that were coming in, and they showed me their email. And they showed me particularly my mom, who now continues to embarrass me, but in this situation it was really bad. She's like, oh yeah, how about you read this documentation that she sent over. She's missing half the information necessary. She's got none of the right diagnosis codes for the service code she's expecting. And frankly, she sent 10 patients on one document. Tomorrow she'll send 10 documents for one patient. And so we've had to staff up this monstrous team. And surely I look around and there's like 40 people all eyeball staring at the guy that was not bringing donuts but stormed his way into the back. And they're like, Trey, this is a mess that we have to deal with because she is sending these patients so poorly. That's how I get into this. But we know that a lot of referrals aren't sent directly to imaging. They follow the path that we're about to see. So if I'm a patient, I go to my primary care provider, I've got that back pain that I maybe had. Where am I getting sent next? Well, I'm getting sent next to Dr. Joe, an orthopedic specialist, and maybe a neurologist separately. And Dr. Joe is, this is how we all know that it works, right? PCP says, hey, I got to go over to Dr. Joe. Oh, I just walk across the street. Dr. Joe's already got my information, right? It's 2024. Surely he's got all my information, and he'll be able to communicate back and forth with the insurance instantaneously. And he'll send my order right on over to the imaging center. I'll walk over in the afternoon. They'll have all my information on hand. I'll step right under the machine and I'll be seen. And of course, they will have done everything necessary with insurance to make sure that nothing too crazy is going to come out of my deductible. And of course, that insurance is going to be happy to pay and not foot me with the bill. And then that information will quickly go back to Dr. Joe, who will send me along to outpatient surgery. I'll be there tomorrow. I'll be seen that afternoon, and I'll be all better in 2 days. And in theory, there is no fundamental reason in this idyllic world that graph theory has seemingly just given us that can't be the case. In fact, lots of systems. If you want to buy some stock on Robinhood, the graph is a lot more complex than this, and it's all instantaneous. So why is that? And why does graph theory do such a bad job of representing it? I thought, Trey, we had these nodes, we had these edges. I thought this was going to be accurate. Well, we missed one key concept. That key concept is edge weights. Now, I said earlier how patients have to walk along the line to get from point A to point B, but I didn't tell you, well, not all of these lines are as easy to walk. Some of them, in fact, are very, very difficult. Some of them have what we call a very high edge weight. And you can think about the weight of the edge when you look at this whole graph, and you now have what we would call in graph theory a weighted graph, where we can analyze how heavy the US healthcare system is by summing the weights of each edge. And if we understand weights and we understand that things are not created equally in terms of going from one node to the next, we have to now include a very basic business dynamic that you all know exists. The reality is, I guess I have a girlfriend, I can't say this. Unlike me and when I moved to New York, Dr. Joe's got options. And so Dr. Joe, you see where I was going? I don't know, I just riffed it. Dr. Joe has a choice. Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm getting a nod of approval for that. It's gonna come back to bite me. We're filming this, damn it. So Dr. Joe's got choices. Dr. Joe can send to Picture Perfect, imaging center number 1, or he can send to Compare and Contrast, imaging center number 2. And just like a nice self-balancing graph, Dr. Joe is thinking constantly, what's the best experience for my patient? And what is the easiest for me? And usually it's a little lopsided towards what's the easiest for me. However, when it takes reliably 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get those patients processed, when there's massive backlogs, when you cannot fill no shows and missing and reschedules, it comes back to Dr. Joe. And if you expect Dr. Joe to do a bunch of work, it gets back to Dr. Joe. And so how do we measure this? I promised last slide with some really hammering home this graph theory point, but we can actually measure the cost of every edge in terms that we all very much understand, right? The cost and time or stress of a patient being sent to you, the cost to the referring providers of sending patients to you, and the cost to you of processing those patients. Now you may say, well, Trey, that's not how I experienced the pre-visit patient processing problem. In fact, I have never experienced what you call the pre-visit patient processing problem, and that's fine. Most people don't say that they experience the sickness, they say they experience the symptoms. They experience referring providers that are pissed off with them, experience patients that are frustrated. And frankly, they experience staff shortages, angry staff doing this very, very rote work to actually solve the problem and get the patient seen. The last bit about graph theory is that our fundamental belief, and we've done this enough now to basically prove that you don't need some revolutionary, new third party to come in. Most very, very simple formulas for reducing the weights of entire graphs say you almost always go edge by edge, node by node, and self-write yourself so that you solve that problem. You solve the pre-visit patient processing problem. You solve the time it takes from a patient to go point A and point B. You become a lean edge. You become a lean imaging center, and you solve those problems by accurately and quickly processing the patients coming in, doing the right benefit investigations so you don't miss a request, or frankly, don't waste time on a request. Blue Shield receives over 30%. 30% of the prior auths they receive are completely unnecessary. And then frankly, you need to be accurate. You need to know if somebody's got claustrophobia, and that needs to be documented with your scheduling team, and it needs to go through with a high standard of quality control. And if you do that, you win your little corner of the graph. Well, now, Trey, this was supposed to be a talk about technology. I want to hear about technology. I want to hear about the smoke and mirrors of AI. Bang, I hit 15 minutes. That means we're right on schedule. And we'll do that. But first, we need to also talk about OCR, because it always comes up and people are like, this is kind of like OCR. And let me kind of quickly explain. OCR, optical character recognition, we look at as the basis for reading things like handwriting, for taking a picture of something and turning it into computer readable text. Not, however, computer understandable text. And what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this discussion is how do you deal with the unstructured inflow? I can't keep watching that GIF. How do you deal with the unstructured inflow of patient information coming in? And now a lot of people say, well, Trey, I receive a lot of our orders via Epic. Well, then why doesn't it just automatically happen, right? Is there no clinical review that happens? Do we not go into their charts? Do we not make sure that we have the right necessary information? Now, I'm talking typically, by the way, about outpatient. I'm talking standard about non-emergency as well. Let's just all be clear on that. We need to basically have a process for aggregating all this information into one one fell swoop, and then actually reading it. Okay, now we get to talk about quote unquote AI. So let's get into the fun. All right. So one of the rules at our company is that you're not allowed to say those two little letters, AI. And if you get super lost in the maze and you find yourself in the boondocks where our booth ended up being, you'll actually see we'll pay you if somebody messes up and saying those two letters in a row. And the reason is that almost everywhere people have brought in or ushered in AI into some new domain or for some new domain application, it's typically fraught with a lot of lies, frankly, and lies from some of the biggest companies that we all know. Amazon, Tesla, Google. Over and over, we see sort of hype that ends up being either staged environments or frankly, just humans behind the scenes. And we see this and we know this. And frankly, it's why when you try some of these more novel approaches, applications, it feels like, oh, that demoed really well, but then it actually didn't work in a production industrial grade environment. And why is that? And before we bash everything, we should talk about some actual breakthroughs because there have been some really, really interesting things. Frankly, the only thing I ever did right probably was be in the right place when attention is all you need came out. And what it effectively, the sort of synopsis of what I want us all to take away from this, especially as it relates to language models, which is where we'll be spending a lot of time, and that's really what's garnered most of the hype recently, is you can teach a meaning, an underlying meaning to words in the context of a relationship. And the actual word, right, is they can attend to the meaning of words in a relationship. And it actually just came out relatively recently. If anybody's seen the movie Arrival, it was actually, the approach, the technique was actually inspired by how the aliens in Arrival communicate, where they're able to process all of a sentence, all of a paragraph at one time. They didn't need to do it sequentially. Well, that's kind of interesting. So you're saying that the key theory here was that if you parallelize processing, teaching a model how to understand and interpret the meaning of words, we can create something that's really, really smart. So we need two things: a ton of compute that can operate in a parallel environment, and I'll just kind of gloss over that, and then a ton of data. Hence NVIDIA. NVIDIA created was in the right place with the absolute perfect technology to run massive amounts of parallel computation to actually run the operations required to teach a model meaning of words. That slide, I knew that slide was missing animation, that's why I checked. So if you then say, okay, Trey, well then the two things that I need if I'm gonna build a smart, intelligent system that can really understand language is compute and data to compute over. Well, let's build a freaking smart system, right? And before we build a smart system, I'd hope we would ask, well, what type of system are we trying to build? Now, one of the creepiest experiences of my life basically was in early OpenAI office. My friend, who's way smarter than me and just went to work there full time, she's telling me, and we're sitting in this weird Garden of Eden looking office, which is your first sign that something is afoot here. She says to me, she's like, Trey, do you know the type of model, what we are trying to do with this model that we are building? At the time, it was GPT-3, it really was not that great. And she's like, Trey, we're trying to summon God from a machine. It's dark music, big clangs. And so if you're trying to summon God from a machine, that means we want massive breadth. We want to be able to understand so much of the world so that we can ask questions to that model. Because frankly, if I had God in my pocket, I'd want to ask him some questions. And that's exactly how they approached it when it came to finding good data. So they employed a ton of data labelers to sift over a ton of data. And that data predominantly from the conversations that inform ChatGPT now, but originally from Wikipedia, from YouTube, from Reddit. And that really informed this large, breadth-based generalizable model. All right, I'm losing some people. We'll get back here. We're talking about this patient processing problem. We're talking about the unstructured information that you need to process to get a patient in. Well, that's a completely different data set. And if you were trying to build that generalizable model and you didn't want to deal with a certain set of data, well, what would you exclude? And by the way, this is hyper relevant too to people building really interesting imaging models in radiology, and there's a lot of great ones here. So you would really try to ignore these incredibly messy unstructured document sets, things that come in the fax. They're risky from a compliance perspective. They're super undefined in terms of like, what is the input, what is the output? You have to ask, right, why are the EHRs not building a lot of times the best, the best medical chatbots? The data was not frankly labeled for that. And it's very, very hard to obtain. You got to sink a lot of venture capital into obtaining and de-identifying that data. So, but that really wasn't how we approached it. So when I'm sort of in my haste bowl in a china shop thinking, oh God, I really messed up. The documents that these people are being sent are a complete mess. And I looked at somebody, I was like, who's the best at doing this work? And she was named Angela. So we're like, all right, I want to summon Angela from a machine. And what Angela was really, really good at, as it turns out, when she's just the best at throughput, the best at accuracy, it was things like payer selection. It was things like order selection, ICD-10 code extraction. It was things like have the right signatures on the right notes for the right payer. And of course, she always knew when 5 documents came in that, oh, well, that's actually related to John Doe, John E. Doe and John Doe, probably the same. They came in within 5 minutes. We should pool them together. And if that was your approach, you would obviously very, very much focus on this messy, unstructured data that gets sent in. I always find it funny, by the way, you can always tell the slides that I did personally and the slides that like the marketing team did. This is obviously a marketing team slide. And then you would put on really misleading charts like this one, where you would show yourself really nice and other people's models really bad. But then you would hopefully have spent enough time planting us in this conversation to understand that the reason, of course, that your GPT-40 through 32K, when you drop it in to ChatGPT, performs so well on maybe the first 8 PHI fields, but then performs so poorly when you're talking about basically doing a clinical review or a complex payer selection for an IPA in California. That like 16% gap was where you have to spend all of your time building and iterating and basically tuning to go and get that accuracy. And then, of course, very, very, very important that the model has some sense of when it is wrong or of when it is confident. That's what allows you to enable, okay, we probably need a human to review this. Let's make sure that human subs in. And this is actually like I guess, kind of a data-heavy slide. It is really interesting because when you actually do benchmark these things, GPT-4, when you look at, on average, the 46 fields that people are typically trying to extract on a given patient, if you do everything right with qualification, adhering to all Medicare guidelines and such, it's about 55% in terms of accuracy. And so these things, while they can make really, really great demos in these really nice staged environments, they don't typically pass the sniff test at industrial scales or real benchmark tests. And once again, like we'll say the secret thing was effectively getting our hands, parlaying a research project, OpenAI is not the only company to take a nonprofit and turn a profit, into getting millions of medical documents with hundreds of millions of data fields, tons of page classifications, and then billions of checkboxes. And then again, dumping a lot of that venture capital down the toilet to data label it to be super, super accurate, to build things that do signature detection, something that, even like Sonnet is like 30% on, and being able to discern when there's multiple patients. And it's not an emergency contact, that's a whole separate patient associated with a packet. Things of that nature. All right, it's getting a little too salesy. Let's get back to the general thing. So this is like sort of just a fun little thing. I guess the graph theory, the patient processing stuff, hopefully is interesting, hopefully is relevant, hopefully sort of frames how you think about patient flow into your practice and in neighboring practices. But people always kind of come up to me after, and so I'm sort of preempting the answer to this question, which is, well, Trey, why is there even a fax, right? I've got this nice, and by the way, there are perfect examples of systems that refer entirely internally that have a really nice unified architecture, and they're able to run really good clinical reviews, qualifications, purely with structured data, and they have the right incentives of those referring providers. But that's not the case between two businesses that, frankly, don't necessarily care about each other. And so when we look at, well, why does the fax machine exist? Why does email exist? Why does calling to refer patients exist? We looked at Charlie Munger. We say, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. It's, frankly, that it's super easy to send a damn fax over and leave somebody else with the mess to deal with it. And when we look back at our patient journey and we look at that choice that Dr. Joe is making, we should never take for granted that Dr. Joe, while he does care about times, he will, more than anything, care about the workload put onto his admin team to actually get you the patient. And that is one of the most important takeaways and the reason, frankly, that the fax stays, because it's actually super easy to send. If you've spent a lot of time referring providers, very easy to send the fax, very hard to receive. And again, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. They have no incentive to make it easier, so long as compare and contrast is ready to take picture perfect business. And ultimately, the graph will flow to the node that makes their edge weight the lowest to the referring provider. And the takeaway then from our little segue into psychological incentives is, of course, to never bite the hand that feeds you and to work within the rules of the game that you were given and to figure out how to keep receiving those faxes, because they are going to keep being sent. And again, I say faxes, I mean documents, I mean unstructured, messy orders that you still have to have people clinically reviewing. Now I've got 3 minutes to review our last 3 sections. Our 3 sections as a whole and really summarize. We started off with some jokes that I'm not sure if they landed, to be honest, so I'll be looking for some signal after this. Number 2, we talked, of course, about the patient processing problem, how patients flow through a system. We used graph theory sort of irreverently to try to map a world of math notation to the world that we see of how patients flow, and to justify why it's so important that we are the absolute best, at least in our county, optimally in the state, at taking patients in, at processing them and getting them seen. We looked at some of the hand waviness and some of the things that lead to gotchas and why we talk about models and not general AI systems, and why it's very important that we're very specific about what the model is accomplishing, how it was trained, how it was built, how it improves. And then finally, we talked about, well, why does all this unstructured information, why do edge weights have to be so bad? Why do the patients flow like that? And of course, we used a little bit of Charlie Munger to do it. Thank you so much for coming to the talk. You could be doing anything. I appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.